Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you who are joining us in this important conversation with my good friend JulieAnn Villa. Um, I'm Syed Alam. I'm the founder and CEO of accentedge, and the mission of our company is to use artificial intelligence to improve cancer detection as early as possible because we believe that detection of cancer um, it should be done as soon as possible for it to be more curable. And in fact, we believe that the best time to cure cancer is before it is cancer and the tumors are formed. So in that regard, we have developed the software that is going to be released next month on April 21st, but we have already been developing it for several years. And in fact, last year we went to Tokyo, Japan to compete in the Global Innovation Leaders Summit, where we competed against 1,200 other companies from around the world, and we won the first award, number one award in this digital biomarker category that is the basis of our software. Since then, we have been working with major pharmaceutical companies, hospital systems, and just recently we announced our partnership with Columbia University in the city of New York, where we will be working with some of the most renowned and pioneering researchers and professors to study one of the most exclusive and extensive repository of longitudinal human tissue samples that have been collected over the last 50 years. We believe that cancer has the impact not only on the individual that's afflicted by it, but also not only the family, but also on the society. And it is our mission, including everybody that's associated with the company, to reduce that pain and suffering with the best of our abilities. In that regard, I don't have to look beyond my running club. My dear friend, JulieAnn Villa, who is a graduate of MIT, she has a master's degree from Northwestern University as well as DePaul University. She is a scientist and a researcher, an educator, and a healthcare professional. And not only that, but she is an avid runner. She has run marathons with me in 80-degree weather in San Antonio, Texas, and I've seen her finish those. She's a triathlete, and she is one of the bravest persons that I know that has been fighting cancer. So I want her perspective, and I think it's important for us to hear from someone who is fighting this battle to understand their perspective and how it has changed the arc of their life and how they're dealing with that. So I want to turn it over to JulieAnn. And JulieAnn, would you please take it over from here?
Sure. Thank you, Syed, for that. I don't know, very warm introduction. I know we've been friends for quite some time. And I'm really excited to just share with everyone who's on this cast today just a bit of my story. So the tipping point for me to becoming a scientist, it definitely happened right around age 9. If you think back to, those Ranger Rick magazines and the Highlights magazines that were always at the doctor's office, for me, those were right alongside pamphlets on leukemia and its treatments. And then I vividly remember this sort of cartoon DNA with a drop of methotrexate and how it attacks DNA to help cancer patients. And the reason I had this at the very young age was because of the fact that my brother was being treated for leukemia. And I spent a lot of time in the waiting room / playroom of his doctor at the University of Chicago. And I don't know what it must have been like for me to be in 4th grade with this new kind of impressive vocabulary that I just kind of adopted. But I can tell you that by the time I got to college, I really was focused on just pure science. I kind of saw that as where the action was, changing people's lives. I remember going to a Women in Engineering Day, and I just wasn't interested in like making a better candy bar or, building a better engine. To be young again and kind of have those very narrow, very black and white views. But this meant that when I was a freshman in college, I joined a research group as early as my first semester. And it was focused on biochemistry, specifically actually anti-cancer compounds. And a really exciting day for our lab group was when we got our very own DNA sequencer. They could actually make small, very short strands for studying it. And this was kind of like brand new and very innovative to have that in the lab at the time. Eventually, I found my way into teaching. I definitely have this passion for talking and communicating about science to the public. And then I found myself living in Chicago. And at age 25, I had my very first mammogram. In that exact same year, I got a pamphlet in the mail and ended up signing up for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society's team in training. I trained totally as a complete novice to ride 100 miles on my bike. And from that first event in that first year, I was hooked. I added being a mentor, then being one of their coaches for a long time. I joined the marathon team, and then I also became a spin instructor. And my motivation there was I could get a free gym membership, control the music during training, and of course, talk other friends into signing up for more races with me. And so that continued exactly like that for 10 years. Where I did multiple events, all with this charity, raising local funds to fund research, actually innovative research, and also support patients with the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. So in 2010, the Chicago Marathon, which is where I live, was supposed to be on October 10th. So mathematically, that's like 10, 10, 10, and it seemed like destined for me, right, to just like run a marathon on that day. And also, I had this dream of qualifying for Boston. I had definitely gotten a lot faster, and I thought, this is going to be my year. I'm just going to like get faster and run with my friends, and this is going to be awesome. And that summer stands out to me as like particularly hot, especially for training weekends. And I started having a lot of problems during our long runs. I basically found myself in the bathroom a lot. I had trouble like keeping food down and different things like that. And so I went in to my primary care doctor, and she looked at me and she kind of, talked me through again some of the symptoms that I was having. And she diagnosed me with hemorrhoids and kind of told me to go back on my way. And then later, at the end of the summer, I had done 70 miles on my bike and a long run that weekend. And I was dizzy with vertigo. And if you've ever had vertigo or not had it, it immediately is this thing like, oh, this is not right. Where when you stand up, everything was spinning. I kind of had trouble like walking straight and all of these things. And it didn't seem like a really good way to start the school year. So I went to urgent care, and they wanted me to get a colonoscopy after having some basic blood work. And then within 48 hours of having that colonoscopy, my primary care doctor called me on a Saturday, I think, or maybe an early Friday. I don't even remember. I just was walking down the street, and she diagnosed me with an advanced stage of rectal cancer. And to this day, it's many, many years later, it's still uncomfortable to say rectal. I just sort of embrace that. I know I'm kind of a pain in the butt, but I just sort of own this really uncomfortable diagnosis along with a name that I'll sort of forever live, it's just as part of me of being again, a big pain in the butt of having cancer. Treatment for me involved chemotherapy and radiation for 8 solid weeks, a major surgery to remove the tumor, and place an ostomy bag, and then more chemotherapy and more radiation. And one of the things about me as a patient is I feel this need to kind of do everything I can. I sort of altruistically think of myself as like the model patient. And I took all that stuff that we do during training runs, what you eat and what you drink and keeping track of everything and the numbers, and I just sort of applied that to being a patient. And right on down to the Gatorade. Like Gatorade actually helps you like keep your electrolytes up, which is really important when you have some sort of colon or rectal related cancer. And so things went really well. And it took, a little under a year of treatment. I actually had to stop teaching. I actually remember almost losing my job because of a lack of sick days, but that all worked out in the end. And I got back to being healthy. Diet has always been really important to me. So I adopted, like just kind of whatever new fad there was, but kind of found my own normal of making sure I was eating healthy and being healthy. I added some new sports. I started rock climbing and doing yoga a lot. Eventually, I ended up adding CrossFit on. And this is why in 2015, so 5 years after that very first diagnosis, I had a second cancer. This time the cancer showed up in my face, in my lower jaw right here. And the diagnosis was osteosarcoma, which is bone cancer. And I started out by going to the dentist. I just thought that I had like some sort of impacted tooth or maybe some sort of, infection that could be dangerous, but certainly not cancerous. And as it persisted and grew larger, and then I ended up going to a dental surgeon, I just sort of took the fast track and went immediately to my oncologist. I'd learned from that first diagnosis that I needed to advocate for myself, that nobody looks at a young adult, sort of somebody under the age of 39, and thinks, well, maybe this should be cancer, or maybe we should rule it out, right? I had definitely been overlooked. So that diagnosis was not a recurrence of rectal cancer, which is what I feared, but instead a completely separate diagnosis. And one of the things about osteosarcoma or bone cancers is that the chemotherapy is very intensive. It requires usually patient hospitalization and also a very complex surgery. So I had what's called a fibular free flap. So this part of my face on the left was where the tumor was. And they actually surgically removed my entire jaw from here to here. And then there's metal screws where they attached a custom 3D printed replica of my old jaw. And the other thing that they did is they took my fibula bone. So that's the bone on the outside of my lower leg, that sort of small outside bone. And they moved that up into my face along with a lot of the other surrounding tissues to be able to give me sort of functional teeth and dental implants in subsequent surgeries. And of course, as you can think about it, one of the questions that I had was, when can I run again? I also asked about skinny jeans because they were like still really in fashion at the time. And I wanted to just kind of get back to normal. Those were kind of my things, right? About like, when can I do what sort of makes me me? And after about a year of treatment, I decided that I wanted to get back to running, specifically because I felt like I was robbed of an experience. I had planned to run 10 races in that year when I got the second diagnosis. And so I sort of like doubled down on all of this. Since that time in 2016, when I was done with my diagnosis, I've actually run 45 half marathons, sans fibula, so sans that extra bone, as it were. And again, I added CrossFit. I got into doing, a lot more regular yoga, all these other things. And I was doing, really well. And at the same time, I was never far from talking to my oncologist. So they continued to follow me every 3 to 6 months because of these two separate diagnoses. And then COVID happened. We all, as soon as I say that, think about and have this now shared experience that we will all be able to think about where we were and what we were doing when COVID happened. And for me, I just kind of kept being active. And after about a year of this like limited interaction and sort of shelter in place, I found that I had an injury. And what I thought it was overuse, right? I was getting a little older. I'm not as young as I was. I have this missing bone and I've been doing a lot of running. And I went into the surgeon's office after an MRI, and he told me that I had a very large tumor in my pelvis. A little bit of history on that. I had actually met him 18 months prior. There had been another irregularity, and they told me that, after some biopsies, it was not cancer and to go on and kind of keep living my life. And now I had this large tumor that was in my pelvis. And one of the decisions that I had to make, and I consulted via telehealth with my old previous oncologist who is now in California, and the current new person in Chicago, and a friend of mine who's an oncologist, and sort of we all gathered together, and that I would opt to go for a cure. And a cure meant surgery, and it meant a surgery that would be forever life-changing. So if you think about your pelvis, like the human anatomy, it's kind of shaped like a butterfly, right? You have like the left side and the right side, and my tumor occupied mostly the right side. So I had last year in June what's called an internal hemipelvectomy, where they removed half of my pelvis, just surgically removed it. They spared my leg, so that's completely functional, and there is nothing to replace that bone. So that was this third diagnosis in the span of, just a little bit over 12 years. I'm really proud of the fact that I got out of the hospital sort of in record time. I would love to have my own PR or personal record for those of you that are runners and kind of know how that goes. I feel like my name should be like etched on the the ortho floor or something, because I just was one of the best ideal outcomes that they'd ever seen. And I think that my history as a runner and as an athlete really contributed to that, as well as just the care team that I had. And so we really had the best possible outcome. At the same time, though, and somewhat unfortunately, because of, or just maybe during the long recovery time and the lapse in chemo, I actually have had also metastasis, where some of that third diagnosis of sarcoma came back and the cancer spread to my lungs. So at this point, I am actively living with cancer. It can no longer be removed. And I am part of a clinical trial. My current oncologist is one of the top clinical researchers in the country. And I'm currently getting immunological therapy in an innovative combination. And it's been going very well so far. And I'm just actively living with cancer and able to return to work. And, adaptive sports has been my new thing as well. So that's my story, sort of the whole thing of how it's possible to have, or where I am in terms of having 3 diagnoses. And the one thing I just kind of wanted to share is I think about sort of my perspective and why I wanted to join today is that, my brother was diagnosed in the 80s, and his oncologist was and is one of the innovators for leukemia treatments. It used to be less than a 50% survival, and today it's close to like 90% for that leukemia. But I also have seen innovation in terms of genetics. So I had my first genetic testing when I was 25, and for just 3 genes, the BRCA genes for breast cancer. And in 2020, at some point, and I don't remember exactly why I had this added test done, but I had a full DNA and RNA 29 gene panel done. And I now have been diagnosed with something called Li-Fraumeni syndrome, which means that I carry a predisposition to get cancer before age 30, which of course we already knew that. That wasn't any big of a surprise or really a worry. And unfortunately, it also carries with it the likelihood of getting multiple cancers, separate diagnoses, as well as I am highly susceptible to the damage caused by radiation. And that's relevant for me because what we also know, or what I live with, is the fact that my first cancer treatment, along with the radiation that happened, is very likely what caused this most recent recurrence, or recent cancer rather, in my pelvis, requiring the surgery to remove that bone. So it's a lot, to be a part of, this sort of very small number of people who have multiple cancers like this, and living with the things that I do. But I'm still here, and sharing my story is definitely something that really I am committed to doing, and I think is a really important part of survival. So I'm going to stop there and ask and see what questions we have, or kind of open it up. And I'm open to answering personal as well as, medical questions.
Well, thank you, JulieAnn, and thank you. And I just cannot appreciate the fact that you actually have had 3 separate cancers over a period of 12, 15 years, and you have not really given up. You're fighting it. I think you're smarter. Being an MIT graduate, you're smarter than cancer, and you're being a triathlete and an athlete, you're harder and faster and more fierce than cancer. So I just simply cannot fathom that kind of courage. I mean, you're one of the bravest persons I know. So JulieAnn is also very graciously agreed to answer any questions as possible. So one of the first questions that we have is and from your patient perspective, do you think genetics testing is the future of cancer treatment, or what your thoughts are on that, or early detection for that?
Yeah, What I think is yes, that genetic components is the future or is the present. We've all seen we all know the words PCR now, right? We've all seen how much faster things are coming in terms of technology. And actually, I was saying to you, Syed, that just yesterday, they approved molecular genetic testing for cancer patients in the state of Illinois. So that means that they could test a tumor and identify more specificity about it, more likelihood to respond to specific treatments. We know, it's not just a general tumor in a part of your body, but we know specifically a lot more about the origins of that. I think the fact that we're able to do it so much faster and also it's so much cheaper, those really are the keys to innovation. And I also wanted to say that that's what appeals to me about the solution that you're proposing and your team is working towards, because I do work, in telehealth and digital medicine, and we often talk about scalability and also equity. Is it cost effective? Can it reach everyone? And to me, that's one of the advantages of doing this AI-driven solution, because that advantage is, once it's available, is easily, available to anyone, or an add-on that's, low cost, ultimately.
Right, and you were just talking about that, because cancer affects all economic strata. All races, all ages, all genders. So I think the equity is a big part of that. And I think when you're mentioning that it's been approved, genetic or biomarker testing has been approved in Illinois, that also means that insurance now covers that. So I think that's another thing. When we were talking before, I think you were also mentioning that there was a delay in your proper diagnosis. And how early detection do you think may have altered that arc? If it was not misdiagnosed, if there was early detection, because that's really what our mission is. What is your perspective on that?
I would say two main things. One is that my primary care, to be very honest, just didn't consider my genetic history. Okay. So had she done that, it would have been an earlier, stage. I had been presenting with symptoms because of being so active, right, and she simply ignored it. So that's really vital for anyone in that AYA or young adult community under 39, because we live longer and people get detection later for us, or we're often just overlooked. But the other thing for me is that even with this most recent cancer, they did 2 separate biopsies of my hip, or my pelvis, and it just came up with nothing, right? So inconclusive. Spindle cells are what we're seeing under the microscope. And that is another question for me of, did they not get the sample right, or did they not know what they were looking at? Sarcoma specifically, they actually had to send my sample out to Mayo Clinic, even though I live in Chicago with major comprehensive cancer centers, to get the actual pathological diagnosis. And even then, it's still very general because of it being sarcoma. So I think that that's another important component. Imagine if I weren't living in Chicago and I were somewhere rural where I might not have access, the ability to send out that scan or whatnot and have, a lot more, things to look at, or detection capabilities, I guess is a better way to say that, I think is really important.
Right. We have another question from Sadaf. Oh, okay. That's just a comment. So again, this is such an inspiring. I have a couple of questions for you. How has this really impacted, your lifestyle, and how do you deal with that? How do you, and what do you want? What do you want the healthcare community? How to address that? What would be your ask of the the medical professionals and people like us who are trying to fight this fight, for us to understand, because I have no idea how that affects that in real time, but I think you're going through that. So can you really elaborate on that a little bit?
I'll tell you one thing, and I hope that it's relevant. One of the things that I do is that when I go into the hospital, I actually bring pictures of who I am as an athlete, and I actually put them up on my patient wall. They're actually here behind me. And one of the reasons that I do that is because it's important that my care team sees me as more than just a patient, more than just someone like a cancer patient. And it really impacts how people, interact with me. The surgical resident that I had when I had this last surgery, I used to be like, are you crazy? Because he would come in my room at like 5:30 a.m. and 4 days after surgery, I was unrestricted weight bearing, or weight bearing is tolerated. And I think a lot of that approach came from me just showing up completely who I was as a person, and not just being this patient, right? And that can be as simple as, bringing those pictures that I mentioned, but that's one of the things, that's really important. And somebody asked about remaining positive. I believe in sort of embracing both sides of this, right? It's like the awful and the awesome. You cannot do one side or the other. That toxic positivity is a thing. Trust me, I've tested it out. It doesn't work. You have to really embrace the fact of and like the combination of, both things. I have, there's another question in the chat that I don't mind asking. Yeah.
Let's go with that. Keep them coming, guys, because this is really.
Yeah. So this question about the virtual care, I can tell you that I actually got to partake because of where I work and the benefits that I have, which are great. I got to partake in a virtual expert panel, meaning that I don't only look at the oncologists that I had. I wanted to go travel. I actually had looked at like UPenn and some other places, but because of COVID, that was very, very limited. They were not taking people. So I had this expert medical approach where I submitted my case to an expert panel, and they gave me their recommendations, and they were in line with what I was getting in Chicago. And that was like, gave me like a vote of confidence. I'm very lucky in that because of my involvement in the running community, I have a personal friend who's an oncologist, and she works here in Chicago, and she's kind of like my voice of reason. She kind of talks me down, a little bit, so that I can really emotionally handle these conversations, as well as, personally. It definitely was a lot to be able to handle.
Okay. Here's another question for you. Go ahead.
In terms of, how do you see the virtual? So that's one of the ones that I just addressed about the virtual care. Somebody asked about this, why a sample was sent to Mayo Clinic. I can answer that one if you want.
Oh, okay.
And then get back to adaptive sport. I'll do that.
Yeah, let's go. Yeah.
So one of the things about sarcoma specifically, as I mentioned, is it's highly varied, right? And so you basically need the biggest database and the best pathologist to classify these things. So my oncologist here knew that it was a sarcoma, but if they can further classify it and further specify it, then he is really key on, he wanted to know if we could find any other molecular targets that I was mentioning. And that was why it was sent out to Mayo, because again, it's this, collection of the most samples, and they had the most or the highest capability of doing the molecular genetic testing specifically of the tumor. And that was really what he was looking for. So that may change, gosh, I've left my DNA in so many places. I have so many samples, so many places. But if somebody has innovation and if there's a new molecular target, then I want to be able to have a treatment that works best with that.
You're right. So and I think the point there is also that we have such a shortage of doctors in this country, especially even so, including specialists. So having AI, I think that's what the question, the person who asked the question was having this embedded, this knowledge embedded in the AI, so that we don't have to go to Mayo Clinic and take the time of experts. And if we can embed it on the AI, would that help? Okay, here you go.
Yeah. So I'll tell you this. Yeah, I've tried 2 sports or 4 sports, depending on how you think about it. So I was able to get into an adaptive rock climbing group here. That was something that I had done before. And I am treated at Shirley Ryan here in Chicago, which is a rehabilitation center. And they have a tremendous array of adaptive sports. And so rock climbing has felt like a little bit of normal for me indoors so far. And then I also tried a triathlon clinic, and that was a lot, definitely 3 sports all at once that were all new. But I simply find that I kind of like have to, right? I don't know what to do otherwise, other than to like stay in motion. And it's this idea of just showing up anyway and embracing like whatever I can do. And so far, those have been the 2 that I've tried. I am very, very eager to get outside. I love nature, like any place, sand, water, hiking path, all of those things are kind of what's next for me. I actually live on the Chicago lakefront and running path. And so, I take walks out there, but I'm very eager to do all that I can to sort of immerse myself in nature next.
Right, and you're also like being an MC for a triathlon this summer.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. So it's a women's running race, and I've been connected with a group, a women's running community called Fellow Flowers, and I actually asked my friend, who's the owner and the founder of the race, do I belong in this community anymore of women who move and run? Like, do I need to like step away from that community to make space for something else, right? Because you can't like just keep watching.
Right.
And she, reminded me that I love cheering for the Chicago Marathon, and I kind of laughing because you've seen that, right? There's like,
right.
Like pom-poms and tutus and all of that I sort of love. And the only thing that I love just as much, if not more, than running in a marathon is cheering for one. Right? Yep. Like cheering for somebody else to be their best. It's really amazing. So that's how I got involved, and I'm going to be the MC for this race coming up in June that's happening in Madison.
Okay. All right. I think we have taken a lot of your time. Thank you so much, JulieAnn. Are there any last questions from anybody? Here's one more question before we let you go.
Oh, this is a cheer, I guess, about my determination, and feel like we have to keep up. That I will say that's more of a comment, but I'm known for daring / requiring people to, get involved with me. And I think that that's important. It's one of the most empowering things that we all need to do. So I'll just say that anyone who is on this conversation and joining us from anywhere today, find a race, sign up for it, or find an event and commit, right? Don't just say like, oh, I'm going to do that someday, because like someday is today. So I'll just toss that out there, Mike. There you go.
Right. Here's another. And I think this is just, it's just incredible. I see some people cheering you, and I always say, and you actually forbade me to saying that yesterday, but I'm going to say it anyway, that JulieAnn, you are the smartest, the fastest, the toughest, and you can outlift, outsmart, outspeak, and outrun anybody that I know. Because the inspiration, because I think as people, we are in technology, we develop technology, and we're always about the technology. But I think with this company, with our mission, and that goes for everybody that works for me and we're associated with, our mission is to reduce the human need to reduce pain and suffering. And I think talking to and looking at you and how you're dealing with just gives us so much more to fight harder, because I just simply cannot imagine. But then you come on this conversation, and you are just as positive as anybody else, and I think that's really what is so important for people to see. There you go. There's a friend of yours. There's your muscles. I just don't want it to. I just wanted to share that. Yeah, here's another running friend. But I am just in awe of you, and I'm sure everybody else on this, and this is going to be on all the platforms, all 4 major platforms, for everybody else to, whoever was not able to join, will be able to watch this. This is going to be there forever. And I'm just so glad to be a part of this conversation and being part of a company that really is fighting for you and others who are affected by this terrible, terrible disease. But thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And goodbye, everybody. And we'll talk to you soon. But this will be, go back to look at it again because I think it's really important.
All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone who joined.
Bye-bye.